Two pieces of AI news that I think matter and one that doesn't. The one that doesn't first. I don't think OpenAI's search is going to go down as a massive innovation. They already search. They're searching in advanced voice mode. That's really the end of it. I think it's helpful, but it's not that big a piece of news. But two things I think that are big that aren't getting the headlines they should. One is the way Klarna is handling their hiring practices and automating AI conversation. I think it's a poor example of how to handle a delicate situation. And I think it's driven by Klarna's business performance and their pressure to IPO. And we're going to talk about it briefly. And then I'll get to Ilya Sutskever and his speech at the NeurIPS conference in Vancouver after that. So first, Klarna. Fundamentally, Klarna is trying to recover their valuation from 2021 when they were at $45 billion. That is what the lens you should use for everything they do. They're currently valued at 14 billion. They obviously have a long way to go. Value compression is just a reality for most companies that had a valuation in 2021. Part of why Klarna is being so aggressive then with their claims about automating away Salesforce and now today automating away 2,000 jobs, I think. That's fine. Like they're going to make those claims because they want to impress investors with their efficiency in a low margin buy now pay later business with a lot of bad debt. It makes a ton of sense for them business wise to argue that they're extremely efficient because it defends their margin and it helps them project defensive margin when they're looking to IPO. That doesn't mean that it's actually as substantive as they claim. That remains to be seen. It is possible that Klarna will end up automating away a significant part of their workflow. They have, unlike many SaaS providers, very defined business logic. They have very clear product requirements. It's actually one of the lower ambiguity SaaS businesses out there. You buy now, you pay later. Like there's a lot of detail in bad debt and how you manage bad debt. I've looked at that briefly in another walk of life. But overall, from a business perspective, it's one of the clearer playbooks to run. So I could see if they really wanted to commit to it, that it might be one of the earlier places where you start to see some labor replacement with AI, et cetera. But what I don't appreciate is Klarna claiming they are already doing this when their actual jobs page doesn't reflect that reality. They are saying they've paused hiring, for example, but you can find 54 open positions on Klarna's website right now and on LinkedIn. And they're not meaningless positions. They're hiring senior software engineers. So if you're going to claim that you are pausing hiring and then publicly not live up to that promise, I think it's right for people to ask questions about why you're making such aggressive statements when the reality doesn't live up to what you're claiming. So I think that the reason I call this out as strategic is that in 2025, we are going to see a lot more statements from companies that feel like Klarna's statement, because it's going to be very fashionable for companies to claim huge gains from AI efficiencies. We need to ask where the reality is. We need to ask where people are actually delivering gains with AI in production versus where they are making a PR statement. And right now, it's really difficult to see what Klarna is actually delivering, and we're just going to have to wait and see. And I think that the lesson I take away from this is to be a little bit skeptical about AI automation claims and jobs heading into 2025. It's like, prove it, right? Moving on to number two, moving on to Ilya and his speech at NeurIPS in Vancouver. So Ilya is the grandfather of AI, not the only one. There's a lot of people who can make that claim. And Ilya's a young guy, so he's much less gray than me. But he has been instrumental in building AI. He was a co-founder at OpenAI. He has been critical to the development of large language models since 2014. So they invited him back a decade later at NeurIPS to reflect on sort of how things have come this far, what's up ahead, very classic thing, right? And now he's a founder at Safe Superintelligence. So he is intimately involved in building a motion to superintelligence, which is usually defined as an intelligence that is great enough to run an entire organization's worth of value through AI without any people whatsoever. So imagine like your startup of 200 is just an AI. So he comes, and mostly what people report on is his quote that the internet is like oil. It's a non-renewable resource. We've already used it for pre-training and it's gone. And so people talk about that, right? And that's his framed as his comment on the great pre-training controversy, where we are wondering if we're hitting a pre-training wall. Google fires back today and says, we're not hitting a pre-training wall. That's only if you don't have imagination. And we will have to see how that all plays out. I want to call out something that I think people overlooked. Ilya has had opinions in the past about what's just ahead. They're not always correct, especially in terms of sequencing. It's very difficult to get the future right sequentially. It's easier to get it right conceptually if you deeply know your field. He deeply knows the field. And so if you look at past statements about how large language models will progress, he's often conceptually correct. But he has been so hesitant about what's ahead. And that came out at NeurIPS. It's like this moment passed with ChatGPT and reaching GPT-4 level, now O1. And the sense that nobody really talked about that I got from Ilya's talk is that he's not sure what's ahead for the first time in a long time. And I think that's worth talking about. That's a story. And he hazarded some guesses about how we get to superintelligence, but for the founder of Safe Superintelligence to really publicly not be sure about the next step forward is a remarkable thing. From the money graph on his presentation, I think his bet is on recursive AI self-improvement, but that's very unproven. And the money graph, by the way, is this like line chart where he basically calls out that intelligence and brain size in mammals are somewhat correlated, except for hominids, us. And we have found a way to hack our wetware, hack our brains, so that we are able to have intelligence that scales that isn't linearly linked to brain size. Great. Love that. It's a very astute observation, but it's an analogy. It's not exactly clear how that would map to artificial intelligence, and Ilya made it pretty clear that he's not sure yet either. Now, it is possible he is concealing alpha, right? He has some special insight on this that as the founder of Safe Superintelligence, he's going to keep to himself until he can prove it. That's a possibility. But my sense is he's actually trying to figure out the way forward with the rest of us. And that's going to make for a very interesting 2025 because there's a lot of candidates. There's people who are saying extra test time, extra inference time when you type in your chat is going to help us really scale intelligence. There's people saying synthetic data is the way forward. And we don't need an internet's worth of data for pre-training because the LLMs can generate their data now. There's people who are saying that it's about logic, which is something that Ilya tipped his cap to in the presentation, saying that if we can teach machines to be logical, we have a path forward. This feels like a hinge moment. It feels like the beginning of 2025 is one of those inflection points where there's multiple paths into the future. And some of the leading model makers and some of the leading thinkers in the space are still trying to figure out what is a path toward the next step change in intelligence and what does it look like. We shall see. I'm excited to find out. But those are things that I think are more strategic versus the OpenAI search stuff, which made headlines. I hope you enjoyed this. Cheers.